thousands of years, humans have built structures where construction seems almost impossible. A lighthouse standing alone on a remote sea stack. A monastery clinging to a vertical cliff. A highway suspended above a canyon. Are these masterpieces of engineering or reckless ambition? Get ready to discover structures that barely seem real. First, we face a lighthouse surrounded by ocean. Þrídrangaviti Lighthouse, Iceland. Far off Iceland's southern coast, a narrow rock pillar rises almost vertically from the North Atlantic. There is barely enough flat ground at the top for a single building, yet a lighthouse stands there, surrounded by open ocean in every direction. This is Þrídrangaviti Lighthouse, built on the highest of the Þrídrangaviti sea stacks near the Westman Islands. The tower itself is small, but reaching its foundation was the real challenge. Before helicopters were available, workers had to approach by boat, climb the exposed rock with ropes, and create access on a surface that offered almost no way to stand. Waves crash against the base far below, while wind and changing sea conditions can isolate the site completely. Today, helicopters make maintenance easier, but the location remains extraordinary. A working lighthouse balanced on a rock that looks more like the top of a submerged mountain than a place humans were ever meant to build. Tourlitis Lighthouse, Greece. A lighthouse usually stands on a coastline where workers can reach it from land. Tourlitis Lighthouse stands on a different kind of foundation, a narrow stone pillar rising alone from the sea just outside the Greek island of Andros. The original lighthouse began operating in the late 19th century. Its small tower occupies the top of a wave-cut rock near the entrance to Chora Harbor, with a spiral staircase carved around the stone below. The first structure was destroyed during World War II, and the lighthouse was later rebuilt on the same exposed site. There is no road, no broad platform, and almost no protection from the surrounding Aegean Sea. Wind, spray, and waves strike the rock directly, while access depends on conditions around the water. From shore, the lighthouse looks almost unreal. A tiny white tower standing on its own stone pedestal, separated from the town by open sea. Three Gorges Dam, China. Behind one concrete wall in China lies enough water to transform an entire river valley. The pressure never disappears, and the scale is so enormous that the structure has become one of the clearest examples of humans reshaping a landscape. This is the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River. The dam stretches more than 2.3 kilometers across the river and rises about 185 meters. Behind it, the reservoir extends hundreds of kilometers upstream, while the power station has an installed capacity of 22,500 megawatts. Holding back water is only part of its job. The project also produces electricity, supports navigation, and helps control flooding along one of Asia's most important rivers. Stand near the structure, and ordinary scale becomes difficult to judge. Roads, ships, turbines, and buildings seem small beside it. One wall of concrete now controls an enormous body of water and influences the movement of the Yangtze itself. Huashan Plank Walk, China. Most mountain trails follow the safest line across the terrain. On Mount Hua in China, one section does the opposite. A narrow row of wooden planks runs along a vertical rock face with a drop opening beneath your feet. Known as the Huashan Plank Walk, the route sits high on one of China's sacred mountains. The walkway is short compared with the larger trail system, but its exposure makes every meter feel different. Wooden boards form the path, while climbers secure themselves to safety cables fixed into the cliff. There is no wide deck and nowhere to forget the height. One hand stays close to the rock, while the opposite side opens into the valley. The plank walk is not the only way to experience Mount Hua, but it has become its most unforgettable image. A path so narrow and exposed that it looks less like a trail than a line drawn across a mountain. El Caminito del Rey, Spain. A narrow walkway follows a vertical canyon wall in southern Spain, but the rock beneath your feet is not the part that gets your attention. On the outer side, the ground disappears almost 100 meters toward the river below. This is El Caminito del Rey, built through the walls of the Gaitanes Gorge near Malaga. Long sections of the route are barely a meter wide. original path was created for workers connected with nearby hydroelectric facilities, allowing them to move through terrain where an ordinary road would have been extremely difficult to build. Over time, sections deteriorated badly, leaving broken concrete and exposed gaps. The historic route was eventually closed, and a modern boardwalk was constructed above parts of the old path. Today, visitors have railings and a safer surface, but the exposure has not changed. One side is solid cliff, the other is empty space, following you for kilometer after kilometer. Sigiriya, Sri Lanka. A single rock rises almost 180 meters above the forests of central Sri Lanka. Its sides are steep, exposed, and difficult to climb. Yet the summit once held a royal complex with gardens, reservoirs, walls, and living spaces. This is Sigiriya, the ancient fortress known as Lion Rock. In the 5th century, King Kashyapa established his capital around this enormous stone formation. Reaching the top required a system of stairways, galleries, and passages attached to the rock, including an entrance once shaped like a gigantic lion. The engineering challenge went beyond access. Water had to be collected and managed high above the surrounding plains, while buildings were arranged across a summit with almost no room for expansion. Today, visitors still climb toward the ruins as the landscape falls away on every side. What remains is proof that an entire royal center once operated on top of a rock that looks almost impossible to inhabit. Tokyo Bay Aqua-Line, Japan. In the middle of Tokyo Bay, a highway does something that seems impossible from the surface. It runs across open water, reaches an artificial island, then disappears completely beneath the sea for several kilometers. This is the Tokyo Bay Aqua-Line, connecting Kawasaki and Kisarazu. The route stretches about 15 kilometers and combines a long underwater tunnel with a bridge across the bay. The tunnel section was built beneath the seabed to keep the roadway clear of heavy shipping traffic above. Ventilation systems, drainage pumps, emergency exits, and monitoring equipment operate continuously to keep vehicles moving safely through the enclosed passage. At the transition point sits Umihoturu, an artificial island built directly in the bay. Drivers can stop there before continuing into the tunnel or onto the bridge. the road seems to vanish into the ocean. Below the waterline, traffic continues through one of Japan's most unusual pieces of transportation engineering. Siduhe Bridge, China. Before this bridge could cross one of China's deep mountain valleys, engineers faced a basic problem. How do you carry the first cable across a gap where equipment cannot reach the other side? The answer made the Siduhe Bridge famous. During construction in Hubei province, a rocket was used to send a pilot line across the gorge. That line allowed stronger cables to be pulled over the valley until the main suspension system could be assembled. The finished bridge stretches more than a kilometer between steep mountainsides, with the roadway roughly 500 meters above the river below. No support pier rises from the bottom of the canyon beneath the main span. Driving across takes only moments, but the structure hides an extraordinary construction story. What now looks like a continuous strip of highway began with a single line fired through open air, creating the first connection across a valley that seemed almost impossible to bridge. Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge, China. A highway crosses the mountains of southwestern China, then suddenly reaches a gap so deep that the river below almost disappears from view. Instead of descending into the canyon, the road continues straight across empty space. This is the Huajiang Grand Canyon Bridge in Guizhou. Its roadway stands about 625 meters above the river, making it the world's highest bridge by deck height. The structure stretches nearly 2.9 kilometers, while its main suspension span reaches about 1,420 meters across the canyon. Before the bridge opened, traveling between opposite sides could take around 2 hours through the rugged terrain. The new crossing reduces that journey to only a few minutes. From the deck, the scale is difficult to understand until you look down. Mountains fall away on both sides. Clouds can collect below the roadway, and the bridge seems less like a road supported by land than a highway suspended across the sky. Duge/Beipanjiang Bridge, China. A road in southwestern China reaches the edge of a canyon, then continues across a gap so deep that the river below looks almost unreal. For years, this crossing was known as one of the highest bridges ever built anywhere on Earth. This is the Duge Bridge, also called the Beipanjiang Bridge, connecting Guizhou and Yunnan provinces. Its roadway stands roughly 565 meters above the Beipan River, while the main cable-stayed span stretches more than 700 meters across the canyon. The challenge was not simply height. Engineers had to build massive towers on steep mountain slopes, control wind across the open valley, and assemble the deck where access from below was extremely difficult. From the roadway, the mountains fall away almost vertically on both sides. What once required a long journey about Machu can now be crossed in minutes on a structure suspended so high that clouds sometimes drift beneath the cars. Machu Picchu, Peru. High in the Andes, stone walls and terraces cover a narrow mountain ridge surrounded by steep green slopes. From many angles, there seems to be no logical place for a city here, yet hundreds of structures once occupied this isolated height. This is Machu Picchu in Peru, standing about 2,430 meters above sea level. Built during the height of the Inca Empire, the site contains terraces, plazas, residences, ceremonial spaces, ramps, and massive stone walls fitted into the natural contours of the mountain. The terrain created an enormous challenge. Builders had to manage steep slopes, heavy rainfall, drainage, agriculture, and access without flattening the ridge itself. Terraces helped stabilize the ground, while also creating usable space on the mountainside. Walk through the ruins today, and cliffs remain close in almost every direction. Machu Picchu feels less like a city imposed on the Andes than one carefully locked into the mountain, stone by stone. Bivacco Buffa di Perrero, Italy. There is a stone shelter in the Italian Dolomites that appears to have been placed in the wrong location. It sits inside a narrow opening in a near vertical cliff, with almost nothing beneath it except rock and open air. This is Bivacco Buffa di Perrero on Monte Cristallo, at an elevation of roughly 2,700 meters. The shelter occupies a ledge along a route used by soldiers during World War I. Space is extremely limited, and the surrounding terrain is steep enough that ordinary construction methods make little sense here. Reaching the site requires exposed mountain travel and sections associated with the Ivano di Bona via Ferrata. There is no road arriving at the door and no broad platform around the building. From a distance, the shelter disappears into the mountain. Up close, its position is harder to believe. A tiny human refuge wedged into a cliff where the landscape provides almost no room for one. Cabane de Bertol, Switzerland. At more than 3,300 meters in the Swiss Alps, a mountain hut sits on a rocky spur surrounded by glaciers and steep drops. There is no road to the entrance, and the final approach ends with ladders climbing toward the building. This is Cabane de Bertol, a high alpine refuge above the Val d'Aron. The hut is arranged across 4 levels because the rock beneath it offers little horizontal space. Even in summer, reaching the site can require glacier travel before climbers arrive at the fixed ladders leading up the final section. That means the journey does not become easy when the hut comes into view. Weather, altitude, ice, and exposed terrain remain part of the approach until the last steps. Once inside, the building feels like an outpost, suspended above the Alps. It exists where almost every condition works against construction, yet it continues to provide shelter in one of Switzerland's harshest mountain environments. Meteora, Monasteries, Greece. Across central Greece, enormous sandstone pillars rise almost straight from the landscape. Their upper surfaces are small, isolated, and surrounded by cliffs. Yet centuries ago, monks chose these nearly unreachable summits as places to build monasteries. This is Meteora. Monastic communities began settling among these heavenly columns centuries ago, and eventually dozens of monasteries were established across the rock formations. The challenge was not simply constructing walls at height. Stone, timber, food, and everyday supplies all had to reach locations where normal roads could not exist. Historically, access relied on ladders, ropes, nets, and hoisting systems. Modern stairs and bridges now make several monasteries easier to reach, but the original geography remains unchanged. Walk to the edge of one of these summits, and the reason becomes obvious. The ground ends almost immediately. Below is open space, while another monastery may stand on a separate pillar across the valley, isolated on its own island of stone. Tiger's Nest Monastery, Bhutan. From the valley below, the buildings seem almost painted onto the cliff. White walls, golden roofs, and narrow balconies appear to hang hundreds of meters above the forest, with almost no visible ground supporting them. This is Paro Taksang, better known as the Tiger's Nest Monastery, one of Bhutan's most recognizable landmarks. The complex stands high above the Paro Valley, built around caves in a steep Himalayan cliff. Reaching it still requires a long climb along mountain trails before visitors descend toward the final stairways and cross into the monastery. The location is what makes the structure feel impossible. Behind it is solid rock. In front, the mountainside falls sharply toward the valley below. Every wall, terrace, and passage had to fit into the limited space available along the cliff. For centuries, this remote religious site has remained suspended between mountain and sky, turning one of Bhutan's most difficult landscapes into a place of worship. Predjama Castle, Slovenia. Most castles are built on solid ground, with walls rising above the landscape. Predjama Castle does the opposite. Its rooms are pressed into the mouth of a giant cave, while a sheer limestone cliff becomes part of the fortress itself. This is Predjama Castle in southwestern Slovenia. The site was first mentioned centuries ago, and the structure visible today was shaped around the rock rather than separated from it. Behind the outer walls, passages continue into a natural cave system, giving the castle access to spaces hidden deep inside the mountain. That location created both protection and danger. Attackers could approach only from the exposed front, while the cliff and cave guarded the other sides. But every room also depended on the narrow ledge between rock and open air. From a distance, Predjama looks less like a building placed beside a mountain than a fortress growing directly out of one. Hanging Temple of Hengshan, China. From across the valley, the buildings seem to float against the cliff. Wooden halls, narrow balconies, and tiled roofs hang above open space, supported by a structure that is far less obvious than the temple itself. This is the Hanging Temple near Mount Heng in China's Shaanxi province. Built into a steep rock face more than 1,500 years ago, the complex sites dozens of meters above the ground. Rooms are connected by narrow corridors and stairways, while horizontal wooden beams extend from holes cut directly into the cliff. The mountain does more than hold the temple. The overhanging rock also helps shelter parts of the structure from rain, sunlight, and falling debris. Yet the location leaves almost no ordinary foundation beneath many sections. Walking through the complex means moving from one small platform to another with the valley visible below. It is architecture reduced to the narrow space between solid rock and empty air. Millau Viaduct, France. On certain mornings in southern France, the valley disappears beneath a blanket of clouds. Above them, only a narrow roadway and a series of enormous towers remain visible, making the bridge look as if it were floating in the sky. This is the Millau Viaduct, crossing the Tarn Valley near the city of Millau. The cable-stayed bridge stretches roughly 2.5 kilometers and is supported by 7 massive concrete piers. Its tallest structural point rises to about 343 meters, higher than the Eiffel Tower. Building at that scale required engineers to control wind, movement, and the enormous loads created by traffic across the exposed valley. The deck was assembled in sections and pushed outward from the land until the crossing was completed between the piers. Today, thousands of vehicles pass over it with little sense of the empty space below. But when fog fills the valley, the landscape disappears completely, leaving a road suspended between clouds and sky. Dachstein Stairway to Nothingness, Austria. 14 narrow steel steps descend beyond the edge of a mountain, ending at a small glass platform with nothing directly beneath it. From there, the rock face drops hundreds of meters toward the valley floor. This is the Dachstein Stairway to Nothingness in Austria. Built high in the Dachstein Massif, the attraction projects visitors out over the cliff rather than leading them towards safer ground. The final glass platform sits about 400 meters above the base of the wall. The structure is supported by heavy steel components anchored into the mountain, and its exposed position means wind, snow, ice, and sudden alpine weather remain part of the experience. Only a few people can stand on the platform at once. Look down through the transparent floor and the scale becomes immediate. The staircase is short, but every step moves you farther from solid ground and closer to open air. Đurđevića Tara Bridge, Montenegro. 5 concrete arches cross a canyon so deep that the Tara River below can look like a thin line between the mountains. The bridge does not follow the terrain downward. It simply leaps from one side of the gorge to the other. This is the Đurđevića Tara Bridge in Montenegro, completed in 1940. The structure stretches about 365 meters across the canyon and uses 5 large arches to carry the roadway high above the river. Its setting made construction difficult from the beginning. Steep slopes, deep rock walls, and limited access left little room for conventional work beneath the bridge deck. Today, vehicles and pedestrians cross in only moments, but the exposure remains impossible to ignore. Look over the side, and the canyon opens directly beneath the roadway. What once separated 2 sides of a rugged landscape is now crossed by a narrow strip of concrete held high above the river by arches anchored into stone. Aiguille du Midi, Step into the Void, France. High in the French Alps, there is a glass box with almost nothing beneath it. Step inside, and the mountain seems to disappear under your feet, while more than 1,000 meters of open space stretches toward the glaciers below. This is Step into the Void at Aiguille du Midi, near Chamonix. The observation site stands at about 3,842 meters, surrounded by the peaks and ice fields of the Mont Blanc Massif. The structure uses multiple layers of reinforced glass, supported by a steel frame fixed to the mountain station. It must withstand powerful alpine winds, extreme cold, snow, and rapid temperature changes at high elevation. Inside the box, nearly every visible surface is transparent. The floor, side panels, and roof create the illusion of standing completely outside the mountain. The platform is small, but the experience is enormous. A few steps into a glass enclosure where the landscape drops away in every direction. Monte Rosa Hut, Switzerland. From across the glacier, this building looks more like a metallic crystal than a mountain shelter. It sits alone among snow, ice, and rock, far from roads, power lines, and ordinary infrastructure. This is the Monte Rosa Hut in the Swiss Alps, standing at nearly 2,900 meters near the Gorner Glacier. Because of its remote location, construction materials had to be transported into the mountains and assembled under difficult alpine conditions. Its faceted aluminum exterior helps reduce heat loss while supporting a highly efficient energy system. Solar panels generate much of the electricity, while water collection and treatment systems allow the hut to operate with limited outside support. Reaching the building still requires traveling through high mountain terrain, where weather and glacier conditions can change quickly. The result is a structure designed not only to survive the Alps, but to function almost independently inside them. A modern refuge operating where even basic utilities are difficult to provide. Escher Mountain Inn, Switzerland. Most mountain inns are built beside a trail or on a broad alpine meadow. Escher looks as if the mountain itself had to make room for it. The building sits directly beneath a vertical cliff, squeezed between solid rock and a steep slope. This is Bergasthaus Escher in Switzerland's Appenzell region. The famous mountain inn stands below Ebenalp, near the Wildkirchli caves, where the structure appears to cling to the foot of the rock face. There is no ordinary road delivering visitors directly to the front door. One popular approach begins with the Ebenalp cable car, followed by a short walk through the caves before the inn suddenly appears against the cliff. Its setting is what makes it unforgettable. Behind the walls is limestone. In front, the terrain falls toward the valley. From a distance, Escher barely looks constructed at all. It seems wedged into a space the mountain never intended to become a restaurant. Katski Pillar, Georgia. A narrow limestone column rises alone above the landscape of western Georgia. Its sides are nearly vertical, and the summit is barely large enough for a few small structures. Yet people once chose this isolated rock as a place for religious life. This is Katski Pillar, a natural stone monolith standing more than 40 meters above the surrounding ground. At At the top are the remains and reconstructed elements of a small Christian hermitage, creating the appearance of a tiny settlement separated from the world below. Access is extremely limited. The pillar offers no normal road or broad slope leading upward, and reaching the summit requires a steep vertical ascent. That isolation is exactly what gave the site its spiritual importance. The top feels physically removed from ordinary life, with open air on every side and only a narrow patch of rock beneath the buildings. From below, Katski Pillar looks almost impossible, a monastery-like refuge standing on the top of a natural stone tower. Sümele Monastery, Turkey. At first glance, the buildings appear to be carved directly into a vertical wall of rock. Windows, chapels, stairways, and stone rooms cling to the mountainside hundreds of meters above the forested valley below. This is Sümele Monastery in northeastern Turkey, built into the cliffs of the Pontic Mountains. The complex occupies a natural cave and a narrow ledge high above the Altındere Valley. Where the surrounding terrain leaves almost no flat ground for conventional construction. Reaching the monastery historically meant climbing steep mountain paths, while supplies and building materials had to be carried into an environment defined by cliffs, rain, snow, and isolation. The setting also helped protect the site. Behind the buildings is solid rock. In front, the mountainside drops sharply toward the valley floor. Seen from a distance, Sümele looks less like a monastery placed on a mountain, and more like an entire settlement attached to the cliff by force. Santuario Madonna della Corona, Italy. From the valley, it looks as if a church has been placed halfway up a vertical wall. The sanctuary sits directly against the mountain, with solid rock rising behind it, and a steep drop opening toward the valley below. This is the sanctuary of Madonna della Corona in northern Italy. It stands at roughly 774 meters above sea level on Monte Baldo, occupying an extraordinary position overlooking the Adige Valley. Religious communities have used this isolated area for centuries, and the sanctuary gradually developed in a place where ordinary expansion was nearly impossible. Instead of spreading outward across flat ground, the buildings had to conform to the mountainside itself. sight still means approaching through steep terrain, stairways, and mountain paths that emphasize how separated it feels from the landscape below. Up close, the sanctuary appears trapped between two forces: unmovable rock behind it and open space in front, creating a place of worship where most builders would never have considered building. Hoover Dam, United States. In the middle of a desert canyon, one curved wall holds back an enormous reservoir while carrying a roadway across its crest. From below, the concrete rises so high that vehicles near the top can almost disappear from view. This is Hoover Dam, spanning the Colorado River between Nevada and Arizona. The massive arch-gravity structure rises about 726 feet from its foundation and weighs more than 6.6 million tons. The dam was designed so the water load is resisted by both its immense weight and the curved form transferring force into the canyon walls. Inside, power-generating equipment, galleries, tunnels, and enormous sections of concrete make the structure far more complex than a simple barrier. Standing near the base reveals its true scale. Sheer canyon walls rise on both sides, while the dam fills the opening between them. It is a wall built to restrain a river, generate electricity, and permanently reshape one of America's harshest landscapes. Charles Quenin Suspension Bridge, Switzerland. A pedestrian bridge nearly half a kilometer long hangs across an alpine ravine, yet the walkway is only about 65 centimeters wide. There is barely enough space to walk comfortably, while the open construction keeps the depth beneath your feet constantly visible. This is the Charles Quenin Suspension Bridge near Randa, Switzerland. The span measures 494 meters and reaches about 85 meters above the ravine at its highest point. The bridge forms part of the Europa Weg hiking route. To keep such a long, narrow structure stable, engineers incorporated a vibration damping system, while heavy suspension cables carry the load between the mountainsides. Crossing it means moving almost in single file, with the Mattertal landscape surrounding you on every side. From a distance, the bridge looks like a thin line drawn across empty space. Up close, every step reveals how little structure separates a hiker from the ravine below.